Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Blade the Series Episode 5. This episode much more focuses finally on a full-fledged episode of Blade because we have been so saturated by focusing on Krista and nobody understands that. Blade finally actually has a backstory to understand who this Blade is, and that's why I would dub this episode probably the best episode out of most. Yeah, this episode does have a dialogue heavy kind of episode. Plus, also, we have just a bizarrish beginning of this episode that is to just figure out how to lead us to get to the more important story. So, what is to go on here? Well, we are to find out that Blade had been a part of a gang that he had turned. So, before Blade had became actually Blade, Blade had a nickname prior to that called Little Man. So, we're kind of going into the backstory of eventually Blade eventually finding Whistler and eventually becoming Blade. So, really, that's where this episode focuses on, I think. And then also, we just have some Krista stuff. We have her needing to desperately figure out where Detective Boone had gone. And Krista goes to forcibly a lichen-like person, which we are to naturally assume once you hear the word lichen, you're thinking, oh, werewolf. Not so much. So, Krista goes to this location to perform this sweat lodge-like ritual to be able to have these people download information from Krista of where Boone could quite possibly be. Because I guess both the sired vampire and the person had this like link between one another, but I guess it's extremely hard to channel that with Krista, I guess. Which I'm like, dude, I don't know how many times that in vampire movies, like John Carpenter's Vampire, where the person had became a vampire, and the entire movie they are to track down exactly where their sired vampire had been. How is it that it becomes so easy in every other thing to figure out where their vampires are, but in this show, it's like, oh, we have to waste time to put this whole ceremony together so that way it can make Krista even more tempting to consume blood. Ba 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 ba. Like, the whole, like, pushing Krista so much into blood to just kind of make her, like, seem that she is going to turn evil at any moment and go up against Blade and kill him off. So, this episode is probably the best episode out of the series from what I remember. More or less, it could probably be the only real relevant episode in here, but there could be some interesting things that eventually lead to some battles or some fights that might be interesting to people. But anyways, so I think it's that coveted time yet again to just go into spoilers about this episode. Because really, if anything is to talk more about this episode, it's really just to give it away. But yeah, best episode of the series, I think, because we do the right thing and focus on Blade. So with that said, I think it is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this episode. So, we consistently have this new detective, Collins, who is consistently on the foottails of Boone, trying to figure out, trying to figure out where he is at. So, Marcus and Chase are to tell Krista, hey, like, we need you to track Boone down because if anything, you kept him alive, so you are the person that has to deal with the consequences of that. So Krista is to go and need to talk to these Lycan vampires. I'm like, they said Lycan before just to clickbait people and going, oh, is this going to be a werewolf episode? And then immediately they are to just be like, no, it's Lycan vampires. To just kind of make people go like, well, like, I wanted some werewolves in here. But this show, like, has such a low budget that they would not have done werewolves in this show, or even if they did, it would honestly be like this supernatural kind of werewolf where you would probably see a werewolf in like mid transformation, but you would never actually see a man in an actual suit. More than likely, people could say, it's like, well, hey, well, we saw that goofy looking vampire from episodes before, so why can't we kind of get a werewolf here? Like, I just don't think they have the money for the show to do that kind of thing. Like, this is obviously like supernatural kind of budget territory, so I feel like this show is trying to get as cheap as it can possibly get, I think. But really, a lot of people were like, oh no, this show had a budget of this and it like was so much bigger than so and so, and I don't see it. I feel like this thing getting as quickly by as it possibly can with its kind of cheap makeup and all brutal honesty. So, hence why I complained about no hole on a shirt. That's how cheap the show is. There's no hole on this shirt, and there should be. Why isn't there? Kirsta is, or God, I'm gonna consistently keep butchering this name. Uh, So Krista, I'm gonna butcher. I'm probably just gonna call her last name at some point. I'm probably just gonna call her Star just to avoid the fact that I'm probably going to ill pronounce her name. So I'll probably just call her Star from now because how many other stars is there going to be? So Star is to go and try to tell Blade and Shen what she is going to do. Shen is to give Star like a bunch of serum because he knows exactly what she is going to get herself into. And after this whole ceremony is to be over, Star is to desperately want blood, desperately want to like drink. So Shen gives her all the serum he can give her and tells her to take that all at once because she will need it. Speaking of serum, so Blade is going off and he is to go and try to get to this doctor to interrogate him for information. Blade is making his way into this hospital visit to realize that it's not quite the hospital or doctor spot that he's used to seeing. So Blade is trying to desperately make his way to this doctor, and this doctor is to see Blade coming through these cameras, and this doctor is to quickly go and blow his own head off. Blood is to be spattered everywhere. Blade is looking at this doctor going, well, I guess this is not going to be one person that I'm going to be able to get information from. So Blade walks out to see on the hood of his car, there's a note that says, hey there, little man. All of a sudden, Blade is getting hit by this armored car and being grabbed and retrieved by these men in black masks who are shoving Blade in the back of this car to be set to another location. So Blade is tied up in this abandoned spot to showcase that all of these men are of Blade's past. All of these men are gang members of uh, Blades. One being Step and Razor. I think the guy who is from Power Rangers SPD as the Red Ranger, I think his name is bizarrely like Run Run in this episode. Like, that's how bizarre any of these names are that like aren't actually relevant, but like I think one guy is probably named Jaws, and one guy has like this other like Bolt or bizarrish name. It makes no sense. So Blade is to be strapped and held, and so we immediately have the Reverend from the previous episode who is to come here, Reverend Carlisle, and talk to Blade. And Carlisle is to mention to Blade that, hey man, like, I've come here to negotiate your release. And Blade is like, dude, there's not going to be any release happening here. Like, come on, like say whatever you're going to say, Carlisle. So Reverend Carlisle is to actually lie to Blade and just be like, well, no, like, I'm actually not here to negotiate your release. If anything, I'm actually just here to kind of serve you up to these vampires. And Blade is like, well, the only thing that's going to be served up here is you. Like, they realize like how you have like lost your usefulness, and we immediately have Carlisle, who is getting stabbed in the back by this metal metal stick of sorts, and Carlisle is to go down so that way they can go and consume him later, because Carlisle is assuming that these vampires are after Blade's serum and want to get his serum from Blade. And Blade is like, dude, they have no interest in my serum. They're just after me. Because evidently you don't know that I'm connected with these people via backstory. So if anything, you're going to end up dead. And they're going to just let me rot here. So Carlisle dies. Blade is to be left to eventually more and more get the thirst really badly. Blade is to show his vampire teeth while he is to sweat, and he is to desperately want the thirst. We have also Shen, who is kind of playing back the footage and trying to find where Blade is. So Star is to eventually hear some of the footage, because I guess she has better hearing than Shen does. And Star mentions some stuff that these guys had said, and that connects Shen to talk to this guy named Germain, who is a previous member of this gang that Blade was affiliated with. Shen is to talk to this guy about where these people's address is. Germain tells Shen, well, if anything, if you had any connection to any of these people, you should sever it now. Like, for you to try to go in there to try to go after them, like, you are going to die. If there's anybody connected from you, like, sever that connection now, because it's going to be a waste of time. Like, you're going to die, that person's going to die. It's an irrelevant thing. But Shen is like, well, like, tell me where this address is regardless, because, like, I know full well kind of what I'm dealing with. So Germain is to tell Shen the address. Shen is to make his way to go and take down Blade's friends. So Steppen Razor is to go to Marcus Van Sciver and to negotiate, to make a deal that Razor is going to give Marcus Blade, and Marcus needs to basically give him the keys to this house that that both Razor and Marcus are going to have an alliance after this, after they are to serve up Blade to Marcus. And Marcus is kind of hesitant about this, but he's like, well, like, if they're going to serve me up Blade, like, I'm not going to say no. So Blade continues to get weaker, and Razor realizes that, like, well, yeah, like, now that you're, like, the thirst is really in you, like, you are actually much weaker than a lot of us. So Razor starts stabbing into Blade, and then Razor eventually, once they are to take Blade to eventually get served up to Marcus, Steppen is to try and carve off every single tattoo that Blade is to have, to just say, like, well, hey, like, you're not going to hold our markers anymore. I'm going to rip all of these tattoos off of your skin. So there's a line of dialogue that happens in between the whole, like, tattoo removal. So Blade is to talk to Razor, and Razor is to mention how like, they were gang members before, on how and Blade used to be called Little Man, and Little Man was a very weak, defenseless guy that ended up being like, tied to this gang, and Little Man started to bite and turn every single one of them. Every single one of these vampires are basically outcasts because they were tied to Blade at one point. None of these guys have the Daywalker ability that Blade has, so, like, there's that. Because obviously they were all wearing masks, grabbing Blade, so they don't have the Daywalker ability. So Razor mentions that they were all turned, and Little Man was kind of at first, kind of like the weaker of all of them, but eventually he just became their leader, just because, like, he kind of just took control of this gang. So Razor eventually mentions that at some point that Whistler was to come and basically nab Blade, and basically try to fight all these gang members off. And then all of a sudden, sometime later, they were to hear a guy who was named Blade, and that they heard how scary and spooky that Blade was. But then eventually the gang started to realize that Blade was actually Little Man all along, and they're like, "Oh, well, like, we're gonna have to collect on that Blade guy, because, like, yeah, Little Man is Blade, so we're gonna go after him." So we have Whistler as a verbal reference. We don't actually have any imagery. We don't actually have this showcasing a Whistler in this show, which is kind of sad, but I guess, like, they just had to reference it, because probably they didn't want to pay somebody money, of whoever invented that character, to actually have a much more prominent like, visual representation, because somebody would have gotten paid somewhere. So Razor and his gang is to have Blade go and be served up to Marcus, and so they're waiting for Marcus to eventually come. So Shen goes into this warehouse that this gang is in, and immediately shoots Blade with a ton of serum, switches guns, and then changes into a silver bullet gun to start taking down some of these vampires. Razor is to go after Shen and uh, and try to like get after uh, get after Shen, but Shen eventually has to like run out of here eventually in this episode, uh, because eventually Razor gets outnumbered. Because eventually, when Blade is to get his serum inside of him, he is to start killing a number of Razor's men. So so we kind of covered a bulk of what happens with Blade, and really Razor is to get away, and a bulk of a bulk of what had happened with Blade is basically covered. So let's get to the Star stuff. So Star is to go into this Lycan vampire spot, which has a guy named Fredericks there that will kind of clear up whatever confusion of which I had in the early episodes, because now I remember this story. So this guy who is to be Fredericks is actually tied to Chase, because Fredericks was the one who had turned to Chase, and Chase had mentioned this while she was in that meeting, or she was mentioning this while in this meeting, but also she had mentioned this like for her backstory, how her previous husband had turned her into a vampire, and we are to find out that Fredericks is the one. So we are to find out that these Lycan vampires had been vampires that have kind of gone like the alternative route to going after people and sucking their blood like a normal vampire would. Like, these vampires are trying to restrain themselves from just drinking normal like human blood. So Fredericks is to notice that Star is going to be the one going through this ceremony. Fredericks is to also kind of reminisce and talk to Chase a little bit. So Fredericks is going in to take Star into this ceremonial ritual, and Fredericks is mentioning to Star, "Hey, like if anything, you might think that your past self is now gone and it is dead, but actually your past self is really still very much alive in you, and even some people can sense that. I can sense that, and so can also Chase." Basically mentioning that there is still some good in Star, and Fredericks can notice that, and Chase can notice that. So, like, Fredericks is kind of telling Star, "Hey, watch your back, because uh, like you're probably going to get found out about sooner or later, but I'm not going to tell Chase that." So, because Star like mentions that her past self is dead, and Fredericks is like, "No, like I know full well." So Fredericks is to start putting Krista into this ceremonial ritual thing, And that is a bulk of what we actually see for this episode. And I'm sure the whole entire next episode is going to milk out this whole ritual to bide time. So that way they can kind of focus much more back on Krista, probably, and her problems after this, is what I'm naturally assuming. So yeah, like, we have a little backstory, a little bit more on Chase, and we see this Fredericks guy who is connected to Chase. So that's really all well and good. We have Star, who is like kind of building up suspense for us of like, oh, what's going to happen after she does this ceremony? Is she going to rabbit? Is she going to is she going to run away? Is she going eventually to turn evil after this? What is to happen? Who knows? But I guess with that, I guess that is also the end of this review. There isn't much to talk about with this episode past this point of a lot of dialogue. So with that said, I think I have covered a bulk of this episode, but if I missed anything, I do apologize, or otherwise you can mention whatever I missed, probably in the comments down below. But anything, I actually did, I liked this episode, if it wasn't clear. Like, this is probably the best episode, but, like, and then eventually I'm going to go back into other episodes and be like, but that's where we're at. So, yeah, I think I've said everything. I think I've covered a bulk of this, so I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.